Welcome to the Do Good Work podcast, where do good work is a way of living, where we highlight the hidden inner beauty behind the struggle to achieve a new level of excellence in all areas of your life. Today, we're talking to Jennifer Risher. Jennifer is on a mission to move money out of the taboo category and help us have a much needed conversation about the emotional side of money and wealth as a way to connect, learn from each other, and shake up the status quo. Her book, We Need to Talk, a memoir about wealth, tells her story and explores the impact on wealth on identity, relationships, and a sense of place in the world. Well, Jen, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Jen, you took a really big stance on kind of bringing out a taboo topic of when you become successful in the line of work that you're in, or the line of work of any entrepreneur, there is that point where we've quote unquote made it or are making it or in the process of doing so. And as we continue down that chain of success or experiencing new levels of growth personally and within our careers, we might have different values or shifts of perspectives of who we're becoming. And I'd love to first start off with like your story and your perspective and your shifts of identity. And as you became more successful, how you evolved, and for our listeners, how they can learn from your story.
Great. Well, yeah, let's go back in time just a little bit, and I'll give you some background because I was 25 and I joined this company called Microsoft, and I got really lucky. I met my husband, and then I got stock that ended up being worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. 6 years later, when my husband and I were married and expecting our first child, he joined a small unknown startup that was selling books on the internet called Amazon.com. And we were in our early 30s. The company went public, and suddenly we had more money than we could wrap our heads around. And I want to say up front, money makes life easier. I'm super fortunate. But wealth surprised me. It doesn't look or feel like what Hollywood's selling us. Mm-hmm. I felt the impact as a parent, as a sister, as a friend, and as a daughter. My parents disapproved of what I had. That was painful. And, 8 out of 10 people who have wealth grew up middle class or poor. And yet we're not talking with each other about the emotional issues that arise. So my goal really is to help get us talking to each other. I want to move money out of the taboo category and out of the shame category so that we can connect and learn from each other. Because normally, when I have a problem or a question, I turn to my friends and I talk to them. If I want to figure out, should our 16-year-old have a curfew, I talk to everyone I know. I get different people's advice and opinions, perspectives. That's how I learn. And just the act of talking is helpful because it lets me know my problem's normal. Mm-hmm. And that it's valid, that it's shared, and then I can learn from other people. And the same isn't happening around money.
I think that's really interesting because one, we're social creatures. So being able to talk to others and learn, that's one way that we evolve and grow, as a community and as individuals, which I think is important, but also like the perspectives and, moving away from the taboo land, but moving away into some reality. Like there's entrepreneurs right now who are experiencing great success, and there's others that aren't. So being, empathetic for both sides of the spectrum, but also if you are, working towards, quote unquote, making it. I don't think everyone ever makes it. I think either you're a success if you choose to be today or not. But I think money gives you a standard by which you can measure or use as fuel, and being able to identify, seeing it as a tool and as a resource rather than an identifier or an identity. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Because I know you interviewed a few people in your book around this.
Yeah, let me talk about identity, but also you said, kind of when you make it or money as a goal. I mean, you could be chasing that forever. How much is enough is a big question. And so is, if only then, like if only I had X amount, then my life would be perfect. And I think we often set ourselves up in this way around money. If only I could make $100,000, or if only I could get that next promotion, then my life would be perfect. But I can tell you, I had an if only happen,
Hmm.
and I'm still me. I still, my feelings get hurt. I still have insecurities. I still make mistakes. And I think that's what we have to remember. We're still the same person. I really don't believe money changes you. I think it reveals more of who you are.
I think that's such a powerful statement too to identify. It's I know for in my background growing up in direct response advertising that if you had an offer and you had something that you were going to the market with and supporting them, if there was a leak or an issue, spending money on advertising will only make that gap wider and faster in terms of bleeding cash. Or if you have something successful, it will make it better. On the flip side, same thing as your personality and your values. If you already have the proper characteristics, or and I don't want to say that there's bad characteristics, but there are decency ways of being, and also the way that you treat people and help others. If you already have that in you, this is just going to fuel that. Or if you have a different type of avarice, or if you're more greedy, or like whatever those vices might be, it'll just fuel and enable that. And I think it's important, and I'd love your insights on, as entrepreneurs, or in our own careers, as we're working in the day to day, or we're listening to this while we do the dishes or driving home from work. Thankfully, now that we're able to go back to the office, what are some of the, I would say, habits to keep in mind that would stay with us regardless of income level?
Yeah, it's very well said. I think it just amplifies who you are. And unfortunately, a lot of the wealth that we see, the very visible wealth, is that obnoxious, materialistic, or corrupt wealth. It exists, but we don't see a lot of the other wealth that exists out in the world. Um, what to keep in mind? Well, I think we all have a money story, and it starts in our childhood. In childhood, that's where we kind of learn our attitudes, our habits, our beliefs around money. And I think it's really important to be aware of what those things are. For me, I saving my pennies, being a responsible daughter, um, those were important. I was very frugal. Our family was very frugal. And even after we had incredible amount of wealth, I would drive around the block searching for free parking on the street. And it took a long time before I could buy those raspberries, because they were so expensive, or pay the ATM fee. I'd walk blocks to find the ATM that wasn't going to charge me a fee. That's all to say that your money story sticks with you, and it's important to be aware of what that is, so that you can either say, yes, those are my values. I do care about being frugal and not wasteful. Or say, now I have this different tool at my disposal. How am I going to show up in the world? What are my values moving forward, given that my circumstances have changed? So I think it's really important for us to look within ourselves and figure out what we value, who we are, how we want to show up in the world. And that's at every level of
Mm-hmm.
income, and at any time. I think it's really important. I mean, I want to live my values, and part of my value is now, letting people know that it's incredibly important to have conversations about money. And so it's part of why I wrote the book, and part of why I'm talking to you today.
When you're having those conversations, and I love that you go back to making sure that you have those values in you, but when you're having those conversations, are there certain openers or openings that you've used, or conversation starters, to make it not awkward, or to make it more casual, even if it is within um, it's a peer group, or if it's within a mastermind, or even if it's within friends? Are there different starting points where you can discuss that? Because typically, sometimes when you're in those settings, it's more of an ego stroke or an ego play, like me versus you, and where I'm at versus where you're at.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable. And I want to invite people to get uncomfortable. I mean, it's uncomfortable to talk about money with friends, or I mean, even the people we're closest to. I think maybe it's even more uncomfortable with people we're closest to. How do we enter that conversation? Well, I think it has to start with looking within. What am I feeling in this situation? And I think these, awkward money moments happen all the time. Or you can have something that's kind of looming over you with a sister or with a friend that you just never discuss, so you just avoid it. And my goal really is to help us move into those conversations and get uncomfortable. So let's say it's a friend is always asking you to go out to a very expensive restaurant that really you can't afford. And what do you do? I mean, there's so many there's so many, awkward money moments like this. Let's say your daughter buys a handbag that really doesn't fit your values or her budget, or your spouse's parents are giving to your sibling, your in-laws, but not to you, or you go out with a couple and they're always, going on all these lavish vacations and talking about all the money they're spending. I mean, all these moments can be very awkward, and often we just ignore them or don't say anything. But I'd like to have us like enter that conversation. So in the situation where a friend is always asking you to go out to a restaurant that you really can't afford, start with figuring out, what's coming up for you. Do you feel resentful? No, it's not that. You feel ashamed because you make a good salary, you're doing well, but you just can't afford it, and it brings up some shame. And so recognize that, and then 2, set up a time that's emotionally neutral where you could have a conversation with your friend. And 3, I think this is really important, acknowledge that it's an uncomfortable conversation. So much different emotions come up when we talk about money, whether it's anxiety or fear or pride or resentment or envy or jealousy. I mean, there's so many things that could be coming up. So acknowledge that this is an awkward moment. We don't have practice talking about money. So give each other permission to fumble around and create a safe space and say, let's have this conversation. And then you say to your friend, I feel ashamed that I can't afford these places you always want to go. They're too expensive. And you never know what your friend might be thinking. I think we often make assumptions and tell ourselves stories, but maybe your friend says, oh, I had no idea. It's on me. Let's go out. I'm going to buy. Or your friend says, oh, I had no idea. I don't care where we eat. Let's go to a burger place. We don't even have to go out for food. I just want to spend time with you. Or maybe your friend says, wow, thank you so much for saying something. I'm in a lot of debt. I really can't afford those places either.
Mm.
Whatever comes up, is your chance to really connect with that other person. And I think we often, find a really nice connection with other people through these kind of conversations. And it brings such a sense of relief. I'm sure you'll feel grateful. But from my experience, going through that discomfort, on the other side, you'll find a chance to learn and a chance to feel more connected.
I think it's important too to be able to identify or label the emotions and also cut through that noise to really get to connect to the other person. Because sometimes we set these barriers, or like you mentioned, stories, and we don't know what the stories are going on in other people's heads. So if you address them, address that it's awkward, but also address those stories to sway them, but actually get to the core connection. Because that's the key thing, especially with relationships, masterminds, peer groups, friends, family. It's all about what is that connection? How can we have that common point and being able to support each other, or just to, like you mentioned, have some time with each other, especially if it's friends or family. On the flip side, looking at this as a tool, and I know that there's a lot on the business side with it, like types of investments you can do to grow the business and the cash flow, like that's all fun. But on the personal side, when it comes to leveraging this as a tool and seeing money as a tool, how have you seen some of the strategies that you've developed either for strategic giving or being able to give more intelligently or consciously? Is it just the same as you were back in your days, or is it still, like, as we continue to evolve, a better way for us to leverage and to create more of an impact?
I think we can all use any resource or tool that we have for good in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it doesn't have to be financial. It can be, being generous with your time. It can be anything. So for me, and my husband. I mean, I think we really do feel like we're using, the resources we have for good. My husband started a nonprofit over 10 years ago. He's working in the developing world to get kids access to books through a digital reading program. He's in sub-Saharan Africa and India, and he works with Syrian refugees in Jordan. And now, just this last year, he's brought his nonprofit called World Reader to the United States. He's partnered with World Vision and Raising a Reader, and he's bringing, his reading program to kids here in the United States that are not. I mean, there's such a huge population of kids that are disadvantaged, and so he's brought it here. And so he's spent a lot of time. I mean, he's the co-founder and CEO of World Reader, and he spends 100% of his time thinking about this and figuring out how he can help everyone become a reader. I spent a lot of time writing this book. So I thought I spent a lot of time thinking about money and how we don't share our stories. And I think it's really important for us to share our stories with each other. And this is the book I wrote, We Need to Talk, A Memoir About Wealth, is the book I needed and wanted to read. And I'm hoping that by sharing my story, I can help other people understand their own stories. And I'm not trying to be prescriptive. I don't have the answer for how to do rich right. I'm just offering up a story that hasn't been told, that, explores things like, how do you figure out how do you organize a vacation with another family that doesn't share your resources? Or how do you handle a friend's jealousy? And it's hard when you can't share what's really going on in your life, but I want to help us share with each other, talk to each other. And it really doesn't matter how much is in your bank account. I think we can all benefit from more conversations with each other around money. And as far as philanthropy, I mean, I think everyone is on a philanthropic journey. I mean, it just as we have a money story that starts in our childhood, we start to learn about giving in our childhood, or we don't learn about giving.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, my mom and I took canned peaches to food drives and clothes to the Goodwill, but I never saw my parents making financial donations. I mean, my dad sort of had the idea that, charity was for chumps. Like when we were out in the world and someone was asking for money, the attitude is a little bit like that person's trying to take advantage of us. So I didn't come from a place where I had learned the habit or the skill around giving. And it wasn't really until I got to Microsoft when I saw my peers giving, and I began to do the same. I gave a percentage of my paycheck to the United Way, and I started to give back to places that had given to me. And I started to learn more about philanthropy and giving. And a big part of that learning was having our kids at an independent school. And this is where you learn like a whole new language around giving, development, and governance, and asks, and capital campaigns, and stewardship. I mean, philanthropy has a whole language of its own. And it was at that point when actually I learned about a donor advised fund. Our financial advisor suggested we put money in a donor advised fund. And what that is it's a charitable vehicle. You put your money in, you get your tax break up front, and then you can organize your giving and give over time. And at that time, and I think this comes up for a lot of people too, of like, okay, I've given away the money. That wasn't that hard. I mean, the money's gone. It's irrevocable. It's in the donor advised fund. But where am I going to deploy the funds? And a sense of like, oh, I need a philanthropic strategy. I need to do all the research. I need to do it well. I need to do it perfectly. And it can make you feel stuck. Like there's a lot of fear that comes up for people about, I'm going to get it wrong. And, that was a long time ago. I was in that place myself, but now I've really moved into a place of, feeling the abundance in my life and feeling like I want to give, and I want to give big, and I want to give back, and I want to actually shift the power in this country. I'm not happy with where our society is. I should pay more taxes. Minimum wage needs to be higher. We need a social safety net for people. And I want to move my money now to a place that helps communities, BIPOC-led organizations. So I'm really focused on, kind of trying to shift the power and the wealth. That's a long answer to how to use your wealth for good. But I'm on that path myself, and on the journey. And in addition to helping us talk about money, I want to align my money, all of my money, with my values, whether it's how I'm investing to or how I'm giving. And I do want to mention, my husband and I started half my DAF, half my donor advised fund,
Mhm.
last year, to try to inspire more giving out of donor advised funds. Because just as I had gotten stuck, a lot of people seem to be stuck, because there's $140 billion stuck in donor advised funds right now.
Wow.
And at the same time, there's so much need in our country. So last when COVID hit and our hearts were going out to nonprofits and trying to help people, we put up $1 million and said, anyone who commits to halving their DAF, spending down half the money that's in their donor advised fund, will be eligible for a match from us. And so in 5 months, our million turned into $8.6 million out of DAFs to nonprofits. It also created this great buzz, and donors, told us this is the nudge I needed. It inspired giving. It got them started talking about where they wanted to give in their families. And we're doing it again this year. So anyone out there who has a donor advised fund who wants to make their money go even further, they should look into Half My DAF. We just matched a bunch of DAF. We gave to 221 nonprofits in matching grants on May 15th. And we're going to do the same at October 9th. And we have $1.8 million to give away in matches. So now's the time to move that money out of your DAF and get it to work, put it to work, with nonprofits.
And I love that you shared exactly like your chain of thought, as well as like where we started. Like anyone can start with giving their time, can give the small amount that they can give, or to the larger amount that they can give. And as you go down this journey too, especially if giving is a core value for our listeners, is to be able to identify unique ways or bigger ways to be able to give back to the community. Because life is giving, and part of it is giving you through time or through donations. And wherever you're at, like starting where you're at. And I think it's encouraging to hear all the possibilities to give back to the communities, to help the community grow and flourish, again, together, not separate. So that's really important. Well, Jen, for our listeners out there, where's the best place for people to learn more about you and pick up your book?
Thank you. Yes, I have a website. It's jenniferrisher.com. There's 2 R's there, Jennifer Risher. And then take a look at halfmydaf.com as well.
I'll put those links in the show notes. Jen, thanks so much for being on.
Thank you.